Hello and welcome to another video trying to get you the very top grades. This one is in the top 10 series and it's looking at something that you might not have considered in an Inspector Calls, and that's how it works as a detective story. That is the whodunit kind of story. Now what you need to know here is that Priestley is writing at a time when a novelist like Agatha Christie is at her peak. And people are desperate for detective style stories. They really enjoy reading them. And let me quickly show you why that's going to help you get into level 6, which is the top band where grades 9, 8 and 7 come from. Well, certainly 9 and 8. Okay, so I'm going to show you this technique now. And we're going to zoom in on this paragraph here, where the examiners want you to have an insightful analysis of the form and structure. So to do that, you have to talk about it being a play, but the structure of the play is a whodunit. It is a murder mystery. It is a detective story. And so when you're writing about this whodunit structure, you're automatically going into the top band. And if we drop down to the band below, you can write about the structure or the form. Well, most students will be writing about it being a play, so they'll get that mark, but they won't be writing about it being a play and also a mystery, a murder mystery, a detective story, a whodunit. And if you do both, you can see that you're very likely, well, you're inevitably going to at least hit grade 7 in band 5, but what you really want is to get into the top band for 8 and 9. So stick with me and find out how to do it. Okay, we begin as detectives almost straight away when Sheila says, "Except for all last summer when you never came near me, and I wondered what had happened to you." So immediately we realise that there's tension at the dinner table and that Gerald is the object of this tension and that he has been up to something. Immediately, Priestley demands that we work as detectives to work out what he's been up to. And it's very likely we'll come up with the logical conclusion that he's been having an affair. Now, when Eric and Gerald and Burling are on stage having a discussion without the women, Eric interrupts himself when his father is telling him about a woman's need to define herself by her clothing. So Eric says eagerly, "Yes, I remember," but he checks himself. Now this gives Eric away. We know he has a secret, which will later be revealed as the final secret of the play, that he is in a relationship with Eva and in fact is the father of her unborn child. The other thing that makes this important is that the stage directions say that Eric has to be upstage. So upstage is right at the front of the stage so that the audience will notice this. We will pick up on the fact that Eric is hiding something. Long before Gerald exposes the inspector as not real, Priestley gives us little clues. So the effect Sheila notices about the inspector. Slowly, it's queer. Very queer. She looks at them reflectively. And so we've got a big pause here, and in that pause Priestley wants us to start to work out what's odd about this inspector. In 1945, of course, many people in the audience would have perceived the inspector different to us. To us, he speaks in a language that we completely understand. But in 1945, his attitude to the upper class characters would have seemed unusually rude. You know, even though it takes place in 1912, when it would have seemed even ruder. In 1945, class divisions were still pretty real, and a police inspector wouldn't be expected to be so rude to what he would normally consider his social superiors because of the class system. And Priestley also uses Sheila to move us along with a sense of urgency. So Sheila works out that Eric is the father of Eva's child before her mother does. "Now, mother, don't you see?" And she is building towards the revelation and also heightening the sense of drama so that when the revelation comes, we already know it's going to be a really big deal and we know it's going to deeply affect Mrs. Burling. And this is also a convention of detective stories where the detective gathers the suspects together and goes through what they've done, and we find the solution. And here Sheila is doing a bit of the inspector's work, where she's gathering her mother and Eric together and working out the solution to the mystery, and hoping that we'll get there as well. Next, structurally, it's important for Gerald to leave so that he can go out and do the job of inspecting himself. So he goes out and discovers that there is no such inspector as Inspector Ghoul, and therefore they've been the victim, apparently, of a hoax. Now, the next structural feature is quite subtle, because when Gerald returns and decides that it's definitely not a real inspector, he then starts to ask, well, was it even a real girl that we all did this to? And so his way of escaping responsibility is to suppose that this all happened to different girls, not a single Eva Smith. And then he decides that actually none of them saw the same photograph, potentially, because none of them were allowed to see a photograph at the same time. They all saw a photograph separately. So Gerald's version is he could have used a different photograph each time and we'd be none the wiser. Now, what's interesting here is he is acting as a detective, giving us a possible solution. However, if you've seen my previous video, you'll remember that the timeline shows that this is definitely the same girl, and therefore Gerald is working also as a hoax detective here, offering a solution which is not real. And our job as readers or an audience of the whodunit is to work out that this is a false clue and Gerald is in fact wrong. And the reason he's wrong is because he wants to be wrong, because this gives him an excuse to say that, oh, actually, well, it was all different women, therefore it's a complete fiction, and therefore it doesn't matter what we did, which of course is the opposite of Priestley's message. Gerald also provides us with a really dramatic moment when he acts as a detective again, and he phones the infirmary to find that no girl has died in there today. So again, he seems to have solved the mystery. It is all a hoax. No one has died. They don't have to worry. But of course, we're going to have that final twist when we find that the phone call does come in and there is somebody in the infirmary and someone has just committed suicide. Another mystery that he invites us to play around with, Priestley this is the name of the inspector. And he deliberately names the inspector as Inspector Ghoul. Now, that is another word for ghost. And obviously, you've probably seen the film version with Alistair Sim, where he disappears from a locked room and he is presented very much as a ghost. But of course, it doesn't have to be staged that way. It doesn't have to be a ghost at all. However, Priestley again is asking us to be detectives. And what he's asking us here is to think about the literary tradition. So where have we got this idea of ghosts coming along to teach the rich a lesson? Well, hopefully you're ahead of me here. This is the plot of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, where three ghosts arrive in order to teach the very rich Scrooge a lesson about social responsibility. So what's going on here is Priestley is saying, look, you be a detective reader and examining my references here to Ghoul, make the logical conclusion that this is a morality tale, just like Dickens' A Christmas Carol, and my ghost, the Inspector Ghoul, is trying to teach a moral lesson to change how the rich behave, just as the three ghosts in A Christmas Carol did with the miser Scrooge. Now, the second phone call asks us another detective question. And that is, just a few seconds ago, Gerald had rung and no one had died. And the Burlings and Gerald have said, well, in that case, we've got nothing to worry about. We don't need to learn the inspector's lesson. Now, as detectives, we're thinking, well, what has suddenly happened that means the police have now called and a girl has just died? In other words, what has just happened on stage that has apparently caused this girl to just die? And we're invited to think about a supernatural idea here. So at the moment when Gerald first rings, the Burlings and Gerald haven't rejected the inspector's lesson outright. They're still trying to find a way out of it. But if they can't find a way out of it, then they have to accept their responsibility, that their actions collectively contributed to the misery and then eventual suicide of this girl. Now, once they believe that no girl has committed suicide, instead of saying, look, we were just lucky, all our actions were equally horrid, we have exploited different girls or the same girl, we need to change our ways, the implication is that that second death wouldn't have happened. And so there is a kind of supernatural suspension of time here, and time freezes until we find out which way the Burlings and Gerald jump. If they jump by learning their lesson, that's the end of the play. Everyone lives happily ever after. Eva doesn't die. But if they don't learn their lesson, time starts again and Eva dies in order to teach them that lesson. The police inspector then returns after the curtain fall and they go through learning again the inspector's lesson about social responsibility. A further level of detective story there is, well, what has this got to do with the First and Second World Wars? So hopefully you're familiar from my videos with the idea that the first death of Eva Smith and the second death of Eva Smith are symbolic embodiments of the massive death of the First World War being followed by the massive death of the Second World War, and Priestley's argument being that if we'd learnt the lessons of the first, then the second wouldn't have happened. Just as I've shown you that if they had learnt the lesson of the first Eva Smith, then the second phone call wouldn't have happened. There wouldn't have been a second death. And then a final structural question is, who is the new Expector? Will it be a real police inspector this time, or will it be another ghost, just like the Ghost of Christmas Carol? There are three. Which inspector is it going to be? And the final neat trick he has is that the very last word, before the curtain comes down on events, is he's on his way here to ask some, big dramatic pause, questions. And it's questions that he wants the audience to go away with, because he wants the audience to be the whodunit reader who's going to solve the crime. And the reason for that is this story isn't just confined to the stage. This is Priestley's way of saying, look, everything that's happened here on the stage tonight is symbolic of what's going on in our country, in our society right now. You, ladies and gentlemen of the audience, need to go out and consider the way you live your lives and the way you treat other people. And the main decision we have to make is a general election. It's happening right now. You need to go out and vote for a welfare state, for a fair capitalist system where socialism will get rid of the kind of upper class rulers that we've had and bring in a party who are going to look after the poor and make sure that the employed have employment rights and make sure that we have a national health service so that we can look after each other, and so on. So that is the point of the whodunit at the end. So 10 ways for you to get into the top mark band to be convincing, critical and analytical when you're writing about the form and the structure of the play. Get out there, use this stuff in your essays, and you will be at least on a grade 7. Good luck. If you would like more, don't forget to subscribe. See you soon on my channel.